Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with Brooklyn-based jazz drummer, musician, and producer Layton Weedeman of the Yellow Couch Music. We caught up with him about his latest project, Somewhere Along the Lines, highlighting a groovy, chill, and full of color product done with a handful of skilled musicians listening deeply and communicating openly. At its core, Yellow Couch Music embodies Layton's vision of community and culture, seamlessly blending elements of hip-hop, jazz, R&B, rock, and world music. Always experimenting with sound and rhythm, he takes the lead in writing, arranging, and recording his musical ideas. We cover the full ride here. Enjoy.
Well, I got to tell you, I mean, having a jazz show is one thing, but there's so many different flavors of music that I love, and I really dig the kind of the chill vibe and the newer cats out there that are putting kind of this amalgamation of sounds together. And I really dig what you guys are doing. But before we get into the album and before we get into the band and your history, I want to know, 4 years ago we were figuring this pandemic out. It really went through the community of musicians in a very particular way. How did you make it through that time period, and how has it changed the way that you approach things now?
The pandemic really was a blessing in disguise for me, personally, musically. I think the pandemic changed everyone's lives in so many different ways. For me, I found myself in a transition because prior to the pandemic, I was in a touring rock band for many years. I pretty much focused on one project since I was a late teenager into my late 30s. And it was my main focus when it came to my musical output. But towards the end of that project, I found myself wanting to express myself differently. Basically, that project, I was a drummer and kind of like a co-writer. I shared writing credits with my really good friend, Omer Leibowitz. He was a singer-songwriter, or I should say still is a singer-songwriter. And we were in a band called Courtesy Tier that was very much playing like bluesy, heavy rock with some of the mix of folk, indie, pop. It was something that we started in college, and it kind of morphed over the years. And, I come from a background of hip-hop and rock and jazz and R&B, but I was never in Courtesy Tier. I wasn't necessarily performing or playing the music that I grew up listening to, or I like to say the music that I would turn on my stereo on a Sunday or something, or the music I listen to when I'm commuting to work. So around the pandemic, I lost my access to my drum set. I was sharing a small rehearsal studio in Brooklyn with a group of friends, and with the social distancing and everything, we had to take a break. And as a drummer in New York City, living on top of other people in small apartments and things like that, I can't practice or play my instrument without having another space to go to, So when the pandemic hit and I had to do all the social distancing, I was also in a long-term relationship with someone that was on the verge of ending, and I found myself in this space of really like being with myself for the first time. The band that I was in for 20 years was done, and I took the opportunity, not being close to my drum set, to pick up some other instruments that I've always wanted to play, like the bass guitar and the keys. And I used the time that I had to myself in my apartment to build like a little recording studio. So I just started tracking and recording and messing around with ideas that were in my head, and slowly started piecing together Yellow Couch music. I should back up a little bit, because when I found myself single out of that relationship, that space that I lived in was more or less empty. I didn't have a ton of furniture, and maybe you could say it was like a midlife crisis, but I said, you know what, it's time I own a real couch. Up until that point, I was buying IKEA furniture and never really having, I would say, like nice pieces of furniture. So, and I didn't have a lot of color in my apartment, and I was missing color, and I saw this yellow couch online, and I was like, that's the one. So I bought this yellow couch, no real intention of, thinking about my music with the piece of furniture. But when the yellow couch arrived in my apartment, I slowly started building out the studio, bringing more color in the space. I had these really colorful rugs, and my vinyl collection was on display. And I started inviting, when the social distancing calmed down and we could start seeing friends again, I invited those friends over to hang out, and we would end up sitting on the yellow couch and coming up with ideas and working on music. And one thing led to another, and I said, hey, this is kind of a fun thing. I'm going to call this Yellow Couch music. I eventually was able to get access to a drum set again, and again, I bought some microphones, stuff. I started engineering, which I'd never really explored before. I had studied music and been around music and been in recording studios and toured pretty much my whole adult life, even in my teenagers. I started playing and being exposed to music when I was 13. I'm 42 now. So I have all this experience, but I've always kind of been in the background, or, kind of like followed other people's direction. And this was the first time that I was writing and composing from scratch and coming up with musical ideas on my own. And, so I bought some microphones, found a drum set, started playing. Everything really starts with the drums for me most of the time. That is my primary instrument. So I just started playing some grooves that I've always loved to play, and it's really kind of like it almost ends up being like a trance state of mind. I get into these grooves and I just get lost in them. And I started recording myself. And then I brought those drum tracks back home, picked up the bass, and would just start playing the first things that came to me. And I love jazz and I've studied jazz, but I've never performed jazz. I have very jazzy inclinations, I would say, in my approach to playing. And I love jazz harmony. So I just started to, again, just lay down some ideas that I've always felt were inside of me, and one thing led to another. So this song that I sent you was one of the first compositions that I put together around that time. And I kind of hacked my way through the bass lines and the keys, but I had this structure and this arrangement. And then I started hearing horn melodies. So I would kind of like write them out and then invite my friends over that were professional players, like Lars Hake. He's an incredible saxophonist and flautist. And I invited him over. And I said, hey, here's this groove. What do you hear? Like, play something for me. And this guy, he's just like a one-take wonder. He just gets it. We see eye to eye. We both like the same styles of music. So when he came over, I just hit record. He wailed on his saxophone in one take. I said, hey, man, this is groovy. This is cool. I love it. One thing kind of led to another. And then again, the keys and the bass parts that I wrote out, I knew could be better, and I'm not a professional bass player or a professional keyboard player. So I reached out to friends and other artists here in New York that I knew could replay those parts. I have a really good friend that lives in Mexico City. Her name is Jessica Libertad, and her stage name is New Lyra. And her husband live in Mexico City. I sent her the track. I said, hey, can you make this bass line better? And sure enough, she emails me some tracks. I think we were using WhatsApp, actually. And she just enhanced the bass line, so I used that. And then my friend Grady Tesh, who was my piano teacher for a little while, around that time, the pandemic, when I lost access to the drums, I started taking piano lessons with Grady Tesh. She's an incredible vibraphonist, marimba player, keyboard player here in New York. And I sent him the song. I said, hey, what do you think? Can you help me develop these melodic structures a little bit more and these chord changes? And sure enough, he's also just like a one-take wonder kind of guy. He gets it right away. Yellow Couch Music has really been a way for me to express these ideas and collaborate with artists that I've known for a long time but really didn't have the means or the capacity to work with them. And now I do. Eric Biondo, who's the trumpet player on this track, is someone I met when I first moved to Brooklyn in 2006. I've known him forever and never really had a chance to work with him because stylistically we just didn't really have the same things going on. I never really had a platform to even approach him with. So again, I just reached out to him. I said, hey, I'm hearing some ideas. Will you come by? And there's been such a ease to this project. It's been a lot of scheduling for me and time put in, but I would say it's been such an ease and a flow of ideas, and it's just been like really incredible process to put together.
Wow, that's a great story. You know, one thing I was thinking about with the Yellow Couch, in my 20s, I lived in the city with a bunch of friends, and they were in a band, and they were on the cusp of making it big. And I remember when they would practice, we had one chair. It was a red armchair, and everybody loved it. We called it the Angry Red Chair. And I'm a visual artist, so I remember making a painting of it. But I always remember how that piece of furniture became very emblematic of all of those times, and it's great how this couch has become the same. I'm curious, you know, the one thing in the formation of our love of music that's seminal is the live shows that we get the chance to see, especially the first ones. What was the first live show that you saw that blew you away? And then what was the first live jazz show that really got you going?
So I would say there's two live performances when I was younger that really stick out. The very first one that I remember was I was maybe 13 or 14. I just started getting into playing the drums, and I was forming rock bands with friends in middle school and high school. And at the time, I was really into grunge and rock music, particularly Nirvana, Sonic Youth, Pavement, Rage Against the Machine. So the first concert I was able to go to with my friends without my parents attending, I got to see Sonic Youth in Philadelphia at the Electric Factory. And I don't know if that venue is still there, but it was just so amazing for me because, one, I was just with my friends. You know, I'm really young, and I'm also really short, and I have like a baby face. So I can only imagine, even though being 13, I probably looked like I was 8 or 9 years old, and people were probably like, how did this kid get in here? But seeing Sonic Youth, they just brought this energy and this like freedom to their instruments that I've never seen before. and it was raw and edgy and kind of out there. They used very weird tunings, and at the time I didn't even understand tunings or harmony. It just whatever felt, it was just a feeling. So that was very like pivotal for me, because I was so honed into that style of music at a young age, and at the time of my endeavors into just playing the drums. And then fast forward a few years later, right before I graduated high school, it was me and a family friend. Her dad was a lawyer, and he would get box tickets and courtside seats to all the sporting events for his clients. And occasionally he would have some extra tickets, or he would have an opening, and he would invite friends and family. So there was this one particular day where he invited my whole family and his family and my friends to see Dave Matthews Band at Veterans Stadium in Philadelphia. Now, I wasn't a huge Dave Matthews fan. I was really just going for the experience, but who I saw that day, it was The Roots. They were the first live act, followed by Carlos Santana, and then Dave Matthews Band. And when we got there, The Roots were playing, and this is when The Roots were it was like 1999. They had just released Things Fall Apart, which was their really like breakthrough album, I would say. At that point, it was already their fourth full-length album, I believe. But it was, again, that raw energy and jazzy chords. And like, I also had grew up with hip-hop. I had an older cousin who would expose me to LL Cool J at a young age, and the Beastie Boys and Run DMC. And of course, I grew up in the days when MTV was still playing music videos. So I would see A Tribe Called Quest and De La Soul music videos and just kind of be enamored with hip-hop music when I was really young. But then again, I kind of forgot about hip-hop in a way because I moved into grunge and rock. All the while, my dad is playing Miles Davis in the house. My dad is a huge Miles Davis fan and a Frank Zappa fan. So I had these polar opposite kind of music styles in the house growing up. But anyway, when I was at that Dave Matthews event and the Roots were on stage, I couldn't help myself, but I stopped socializing with my family. I stopped talking to my parents and my friends there, and I just sat down and stared at the stage while they did their routine. And I loved the way Questlove played the drums. I loved how Kamal played these keys. Again, very jazz-oriented chord structures. And, of course, Black Thought being the lead MC, and Leonard Hubbard was on bass at the time. Again, you could hear the jazz influence in their playing. And I'm at this age where I don't even know what's happening. It's just a feeling. But it blew my mind, and it changed my trajectory in, I would say, my musical taste and stylistic choices in my playing. Because after that show, I just went all in to, I would say, like alternative hip-hop and anything that sounded like the Fender Rhodes, I got obsessed with. So, you're talking a Tribe Called Quest, finding out who Jay Dilla was, listening to artists like Common and Pete Rock and KRS-One. I got into this very heavy, like, conscious rap era of my life, and it still resonates with me today. It hasn't gone away. I still turn to a lot of those records. And then it wasn't until, so I decided to go to Berklee College of Music. I graduated in 2005. And while I was there, it was not only did I get exposed to so much different music, but at the time, I don't know if it still is, but at the time, Berkeley was heavily focused on jazz music, jazz composition. So I got this amazing exposure to jazz music on a totally different level. And a friend of mine had introduced me to Ahmad Jamal and Elvin Jones. And even though I didn't get to see them perform live, I got so heavily into the hard bop scene, and I went to the record store, and at the time I was collecting CDs, but I think I bought like every interesting Blue Note release I could think of, particularly Wayne Shorter's Speak No Evil, changed my life. I still listen to it today. I listened to Speak No Evil so much that it started to sound like a pop record and not a jazz record. The melodies on there just are ingrained in me. I know I'm not really answering your question because I'm thinking about, I recently got to see Marshall Allen. He just turned 100 years old. I saw Marshall Allen just a few summers ago when the pandemic, clubs were starting to reopen. That was a really mind-opening experience for me. And I've kind of surrounded myself with jazz players, and I've gotten to see them perform live. But when I think about, you know what, I do have an answer for you. I got to see Pat Martino perform live. That was maybe 7 or 8 years ago. That's the one that sticks out. I'm sure there's another live concert that I got to see earlier than that. But just being exposed to jazz music, and of course so much jazz music, obviously it's recorded in the studio, but so much of it is live, these live takes. That was so thrilling to me to hear that and to experience like, wow, what is improvisation? What are these guys doing to just go in one take, without stopping and redoing it or editing everything? That was such a huge influence that I bring to my playing now. I rarely edit any of my parts. I might tweak a few things, but so much of the music that you are hearing from Yellow Couch Music they're just takes. I don't really get into the weeds of editing my drums or trying to get like a perfect take. If there's a mistake in there that I perceive as a mistake, but the audience doesn't know it's a mistake, I keep it in there because there's such a human element to live playing that I think is needed, and it's what I find to be the most interesting. So that's like such a huge takeaway from being exposed to all this live jazz music.
Man, you've done a really good job of weaving and stitching together a lot of things that I wanted to ask. And my final question to you is this. Everyone has a perception of you, family, friends, fans, but you ultimately run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
It's an interesting question. It's only been in the last year or so that I stopped compartmentalizing who I am. And when I say that, I mean, for years, I would focus on all the different aspects of my life. And I always try to do my best and put my best foot forward in everything that I get involved in. I wear a ton of different hats. I'm currently an office manager and an associate for an architecture firm here in New York City. I'm also a bookkeeper. I'm a drummer. I'm an artist. I'm a partner. I'm a son. I'm a friend. And I would say so much of my life I would kind of like overthink things or try to show up. I'm also a Gemini, so I think I have this tendency to show up a certain way in each of those roles. But I started to realize that I've been limiting myself when I'm not authentic across the board, or I don't show up as I'm all of these things all the time. So I'm me. I'm a man of many skills and traits, and I think for a while I wouldn't say I was hiding from some of my parts or my personality, but I found myself sometimes catering to other people, or how would this person want me to show up, and instead of me just being who I am and not being afraid of maybe losing friends or someone thinking that I'm maybe not as pleasant as I thought. It's really been interesting. I think now that I'm in my 40s, I'm finally at a place in my life where I'm accepting all the parts and personalities that I am, instead of trying to show up as what society wants me to be or what people in my life want me to be. I grew up as like a people pleaser. I found out, and I'm really shedding away a lot of these old patterns and behaviors, and really just stepping into a more authentic self. It's a process.
Right on. This has been great, man. Hey, where can people pick up the music, look into your world, reach out, any of the good business? Where can they go?
I always tell people to please check out my website. It's yellowcouchrecordings.com. The name of the project is Yellow Couch Music. You can find us on Instagram, Bandcamp, Spotify, Apple Music, SoundCloud, all of those channels. I've been active on them, and yeah, it's the best way to find me. But again, yellowcouchrecordings.com is where I house all of that information, and it's like a one-stop shop for Yellow Couch Music.
Beautiful, man. Hey, thank you so much for reaching out to the show. I love the music. I can't wait to get it on the program. And best of luck with everything, man.
Yeah, Joe, thanks for this. This has been a pleasure. I really appreciate your questions. You know, I never met you, but you seem like you have a great attitude, and I really dig your website, and keep me posted on when it's up. I'd love to share it with people.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players and minds in Brooklyn, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. Thanks to Layton for his time and story. If you want to hear more Neon Jazz interviews, you can find us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Subscribe to us at YouTube, and for everything Neon Jazz, go to theneonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.